The engine was still running when the officer's flashlight swept across the windshield. Adaeze Okonkwo hadn't done anything wrong. She knew that the way you know your own name, not as a thought, but as a fact settled somewhere beneath the ribs. She'd pulled out of the Marriott parking garage on Peachtree Street at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, turned right at the light like the GPS told her to, and driven exactly 4 blocks before the blue strobes filled her rearview mirror. She pulled over without hesitation. That part was automatic. 31 years of being black in America had made it automatic. She rolled down the window, placed both hands visible on the steering wheel, and waited. The officer took his time. She could hear his boots on the asphalt, slow and deliberate, like a man who had nowhere to be and wanted you to feel it. When he finally appeared at her window, he had the look of someone who had already decided something before he got out of his patrol car. Lice and registration. No good evening, no ma'am. Just the hand, flat and impatient, thrust through the open window. Adaze kept her voice even. Of course. May I ask why I've been stopped? The officer. His nameplate said Prout. Didn't answer. He stared at her the way certain men stare when they want you to understand that your question was the wrong one. Lights, he said again, and registration. She reached slowly for the glove compartment. Slowly, because she knew what fast could mean, even for a 53-year-old woman in a charcoal blazer who'd just spent 11 hours in a federal courtroom. Here's the thing about Adaeze Okonkwo that Officer Pruitt did not know and would not discover for some time. She had been appointed to the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia 8 years ago. She had presided over 412 federal cases. She had been profiled twice by The Atlantic, and she had, that very afternoon, ruled on a civil rights case that would be cited in law school classrooms for the next 20 years. None of that was visible from the outside, of course. From the outside, she was just a black woman driving a rental sedan alone at night in Atlanta. Pruitt took her license and held it in the beam of his flashlight for a long time, longer than necessary. She watched him in the side mirror, the slight tilt of his chin, the way he turned the card over like he was looking for something wrong with it. This is a New York license, he said. Yes. You live in New York. I maintain a residence there. Yes. I'm in Atlanta for work. What kind of work? Adaze looked at him steadily. Legal work. What does that mean? She didn't answer that. She'd learned years ago that some questions aren't asked to gather information. They're asked to establish a hierarchy. She wasn't going to participate in that. Pruitt leaned one forearm against the roof of her car, the posture of a man who thinks he owns the sidewalk. I need you to step out of the vehicle. I'd like to understand the reason for this stop first, Adaeze said. I'm required by law to provide my license and registration, which I've done. What is the basis for asking me to exit the vehicle? Something shifted in Pruitt's face. Not anger, not quite yet. Something closer to disbelief, like he couldn't understand why the program wasn't running the way it was supposed to. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Then we have a problem, she said quietly, because I'm not going to exit this vehicle until you give me a lawful reason. The second patrol car arrived 4 minutes later. Adaze counted. She had nothing else to do but count and breathe and keep her hands where they were. The new officer was younger than Pruitt, with the kind of nervous energy that made him more dangerous, not less. His hand kept drifting toward his belt. He didn't seem to know he was doing it. What we got? He asked Pruitt, like she wasn't right there. Failure to comply, Pruitt said. Failure to comply. Adaeze absorbed that. In her courtroom, she had heard those words applied to men who had run from officers, who had fought, who had reached for weapons. She had asked a defendant to comply with a lawful order not 48 hours ago. She was sitting still with her hands on the steering wheel. I have complied with every lawful request, she said, addressing both of them. I provided my license when asked. I've answered your questions. I have not been informed of the basis for this stop, and I have not been given a lawful reason to exit this vehicle. She's been like this the whole time. Pruitt said to the younger officer, as if delivering a diagnosis. Like this. Like she was the problem. Like knowing her rights was a symptom of something. The younger officer, Delgado, his nameplate said, peered into the car. His eyes moved over the briefcase on the passenger seat. The court documents fanned across it, the federal bar ID clipped to the outside pocket. He didn't look long enough to register what he was seeing. "Ma'am," Pruitt said, and now there was something new in his voice, a flatness, like a door being closed. "You are going to step out of this vehicle, or I am going to remove you from it. Your choice." Adaze looked at him for a long moment. "I want both of your badge numbers," she said. "Right now, before anything else happens." Pruitt smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You can get them from the report," he said. After, she understood what that meant. She opened the door slowly and stood on the sidewalk with her hands up, visible, and she thought about the 11 hours she'd just spent in her courtroom, and the 31 years before that, and the night her mother had told her, "Baby, you are going to have to be twice as good and half as loud, and even then some rooms will not open for you." And she thought, not this room, not tonight. They put her in the back of Pruitt's patrol car. No explanation. No charges stated. Pruitt told Delgado to process the vehicle, which meant going through her rental car while she sat in the cage in the back, watching through the window as Delgado pulled her briefcase from the passenger seat and opened it on the hood of the car, like he had every right in the world. Her federal credentials were in there. Her judicial appointment letter, which she carried as a matter of habit from the early days when people needed to see it to believe it. Her notes from today's case, United States v. Tremaine. A Fourth Amendment matter she had ruled on at 3:15 that afternoon. Delgado held up her credentials and squinted at them in the beam of his flashlight. He put them back. A Daisy closed her eyes. When she opened them, a woman had appeared on the sidewalk outside the dry cleaners, mid-60s, white, in a yellow cardigan, standing with her arms folded and her phone out, recording. Adaze didn't know her name. She would later. Inside the patrol car, it was the kind of quiet that sits on your chest. She thought about her clerks, Tawanda and Marcus, who were probably still at the courthouse, finishing up today's filings. She thought about her sister in Columbus, who would panic when she called. She thought about the case she had to be back in chambers for at 8 tomorrow morning. She thought about every black woman who had sat in a back seat like this one, without her credentials, without her title, without any of the armor that was supposed to protect her, and still somehow hadn't. What made you special? She thought. What made you different from them? The answer was, nothing. Not in this car, not to these men. And that was the point. Pruitt got back behind the wheel. He didn't look at her in the rearview mirror. He started filling out a form on the laptop mounted to the dash. Incident report. She could see the header, and for a while the only sound was the tick of keys. "I want to make a phone call," Adaze said. "You'll get one at the station. I'm entitled to one now." "Ma'am, you'll get one at the station." He didn't look up from the screen. Adaze sat back. She was not afraid, or rather, she was afraid, in the way any rational person is afraid when power is being misused in an enclosed space at night, and she had made peace with the fear years ago. She let it sit beside her without letting it drive. She began to compose the call she would make in her head. Not to her sister. Not yet. To Chief Judge Harold Emmett Burrow III, who had been her mentor for 22 years and who had a direct line to the Atlanta Chief of Police that he was not shy about using. To the clerk of court, who would need to rearrange tomorrow's docket. To her lawyer. She had a lawyer. Every judge she knew had a lawyer for exactly this kind of moment, and people thought that was strange until it wasn't. The station was the 5th Precinct on Ponce de Leon, a building she had driven past 400 times without going inside. The booking desk was staffed by a heavyset sergeant named Okafor. She noted the name, who looked at Pruitt's paperwork with the bored efficiency of a man who processed these things the same way every time. "What've we got?" Okafor asked. "Failure to comply, obstruction," Pruitt said. Adaze spoke before Okafor could stamp anything. "Sergeant, my name is Adaze Okonkwo. I am a United States District Court judge for the Northern District of Georgia. I was stopped without cause, asked to exit my vehicle without a lawful basis, and placed in custody without being informed of any charges. I want my phone call, and I want it right now." The room got quiet, not the quiet of a room where something is ending, the quiet of a room where something is beginning. Okafor looked at her, then at Pruitt, then back at her. His pen hovered above the form. "She showed you ID," he said to Pruitt. "She showed a lot of things," Pruitt said. "Doesn't mean she showed you federal credentials." Pruitt's jaw tightened. Okafor set the pen down, slowly, like a man who was reconsidering a great many choices in real time. "Get her to a phone," he said. The call to Harold Burrow lasted 4 minutes. She gave him the facts, just the facts. Location, time, officers' names, sequence of events. She'd been a judge long enough to know that emotion could wait. Documentation first. There was a pause on the other end after she finished. Then Harold said very quietly, "Don't sign anything. I know. Don't answer any more questions." "I know, Harold." Another pause. "I'll make some calls." She believed him. Harold Burrow had been making calls in this city for 40 years. She hung up and sat in the plastic chair they'd given her and looked at her hands in her lap. 53 years old, 11 hours in a federal courtroom, 31 years of doing everything right. She thought about the woman in the yellow cardigan with the phone. She thought, there you are. The next 45 minutes were the longest of the evening. She could hear voices from somewhere deeper in the building, not what was being said, just the register of them. The way you can tell from tone alone that someone is receiving information they did not expect, the kind of information that requires sitting down first. At 9:47, a woman appeared in the doorway of the room where Today's was waiting. Late 40s, black, in a suit, civilian clothes, not a uniform. She introduced herself as Deputy Chief Carla Fenwick, Internal Affairs. "Judge Okonkwo," she said, and the title landed in the room like a dropped gavel. "I want to start by telling you that what happened tonight is unacceptable. I'd rather you start by telling me what's happening now," Adaisy said. Fenwick sat. "Officer Pruitt has been relieved of duty pending investigation. Officer Delgado is currently giving a statement. The watch commander has been notified, and the chief has been briefed." "Has the chief been briefed on the contents of my briefcase?" Adiez asked. "Because Officer Delgado opened it and searched it on the hood of a patrol car without my consent and without a warrant." Fenwick closed her eyes briefly. The expression of a person doing math. "That will be part of the investigation," she said. "I expect it will be more than that," Adaise said. "I expect it will be part of a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, which I will be filing tomorrow." Fenwick nodded. She didn't argue. She was too smart to argue. "You're free to go," she said. "I'd like to offer you a department vehicle to return to your hotel." "I'll arrange my own transportation," Adaise said. "Please make sure my rental car has not been moved or further accessed." "Of course. And I'll need a copy of both officers' badge numbers and the full incident report before I leave this building." "I'll have them to you in 10 minutes. Adaisy stood and picked up her briefcase and smoothed the front of her blazer. And for a moment, Fenwick looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite awe, something in between, like she was trying to take a measure of the person in front of her. "Judge," she said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth a great deal more when it leads somewhere," Adaisy said. "Tonight, it leads to a DOJ complaint, and if I have my way, a departmental review of Officer Pruitt's full case history. Because men like that don't start with federal judges." She walked out of the building at 10:14. The night air hit her face, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her eyes closed, just breathing. The woman in the yellow cardigan had waited. Her name was Ruth Ellenbogen, and she was 68 years old, and she had been walking home from her book club when she'd seen the patrol car lights and stopped because something in her gut told her to stop. She'd stood there for 22 minutes and recorded the whole thing on her phone. Adaisy being pulled from her car, hands up, the briefcase being searched on the hood, the patrol car driving away. She found Adaisy on the sidewalk outside the precinct and said, "I don't know if you need this, but I have the whole thing." Adaise looked at her for a moment. "I need it," she said. "I need it very much." Ruth Ellenbogen sent the video to Adaisy's phone right there on the sidewalk and then said, "Good luck," and walked the rest of the way home. The video would be in the DOJ complaint the next morning. It would be cited in the formal disciplinary proceeding. It would become, as these things sometimes do, the hinge on which everything else turned, because Everything Pruitt had written in his incident report described a combative, non-compliant subject, and the video showed a woman with her hands on the steering wheel, asking a reasonable question in a reasonable voice, being told she had no right to ask it. The gap between those two descriptions is where accountability lives when you're lucky enough to find it. Officer Pruitt's disciplinary hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. By then, a review of his case history had surfaced 14 prior complaints, 11 from black motorists, 2 from black pedestrians, 1 from a black business owner who'd called 911 about a break-in and somehow ended up answering questions about her own right to be on the premises. None of those 14 complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. They'd been reviewed, logged, and shelved by an internal affairs process that Adaisy's DOJ complaint would later describe as structurally inadequate and operationally compromised. Those are lawyer words. Let me tell you what they mean. They mean that 14 people had told the truth, and 14 times the system had looked the other way. Not because it didn't hear them, because it had decided, again and again, that their version of events was the less credible one, and the officer's version, which matched the department's preferred story, was the more convenient truth. Until the federal judge showed up. Until the woman in the yellow cardigan stood on the sidewalk for 22 minutes. Until someone recorded it. Pruitt was terminated, not suspended, not reassigned. Terminated, the department's word, delivered by the chief at a press conference where he used the phrase "zero tolerance" 4 times in 12 minutes and did not take questions. Delgado received a 30-day suspension and mandatory retraining. The watch commander who had been briefed before Pruitt brought Adaizy in, and who had not intervened, was placed on administrative leave while the investigation determined exactly what he'd known and when. The DOJ opened a pattern or practice inquiry into the 5th Precinct 2 months after that. Adaizy testified. She sat at a table in a federal building, different building, same city, and she described the evening in precise, methodical, unadorned terms, times, locations, exact words spoken. She had the kind of memory that comes from 30 years of listening to testimony, from understanding that the difference between a good case and a great one is often a single specific detail that no one thought to dispute. The investigator who took her statement shook her hand afterward and said, "I want you to know that your filing made it possible for us to move forward on this. 14 people made it possible," Adaizy said. "I just happened to be the one with the credentials to make you listen." The investigator didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure there was one. The woman who'd been stopped on her way home from work and arrested in a hotel parking lot in Michigan. Adaizy had read about cases like that, had presided over variations of it, had written opinions about the constitutional dimensions of pretextual stops. She knew the architecture of it. She knew the way it was supposed to work when it worked, and the way it collapsed when it didn't. What she hadn't known until she was sitting in the back of Pruitt's patrol car at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night was what it felt like from inside the collapse. She knew it now. She would carry it. Not as a wound. She didn't have patience for the kind of injury that only turns inward, but as a working knowledge. The kind you bring into a courtroom. The kind that shapes how you hear a case, what questions you ask, where you look for the truth that the official report decided not to include. A young clerk asked her once, months after the hearing, whether she ever got angry, about that night, about the 14 complaints, about the whole machinery of it. She considered the question. "Anger is information," she said. "It tells you where something is broken, but you can't fix a thing while you're busy being furious at it. You have to put it down for long enough to pick up a tool." The clerk wrote it down. Adaizy noticed and said nothing and thought, "Good." In the end, what Pruitt hadn't understood, what men like Pruitt rarely understand until it's too late, is that authority borrowed from a badge is smaller than it looks. Real authority is built, over years, in rooms full of skeptics, by doing the work until the work speaks for itself. Adaizy Okonkwo had been building hers for 3 decades, one ruling at a time, in a system that had not always wanted her there and had not always made room for her, and had sometimes, on a Tuesday night in Atlanta, sent a man with a flashlight to remind her of its preference. She had not forgotten. She had not become bitter. She had become precise. There's a difference. The difference is what the law is for when it works the way it's supposed to. And when it doesn't, when the system fails the 14 people before the federal judge arrives. That's not an argument for giving up on the law. It's an argument for making sure that more people have what Adizi had that night. Not the title, not the credentials, the knowledge that they have the right to ask why, and the stubbornness to keep asking until someone answers.